Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Chen from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Very warm welcome to our side event, the Local Pathway Fellowship, empowering young people to implement the new urban agenda in their cities. So, before we start, let me just give a very brief context and intro of what SDSN does and who we are. So, in 2012, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon launched the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And the purpose of this network is to mobilize all the non-state actors, whether it's in business, academia, young people, to mobilize to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2015, the UN Secretary General found the SDSN Youth, the Global Youth Initiative of SDSN. And what we do here is to empower young people, give them a platform to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and create sustainable development solutions. The Local Pathway Fellowship is one of these global initiatives to serve that purpose. It was launched in the UN Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development in October 2016 in Ecuador, in Quito, Ecuador. And then we recruit an inaugural cohort of 60 fellows from 52 cities around the world, who are all young urban leaders with their passion in the implementation of the SDG in their cities. And this year, the Local Pathway Fellowship is a one-year training program. As our fellows are about to graduate, it's very our pleasure to invite 11 of them to be here with us today. Some of them will give their presentation to talk about what they have been doing over the years. So let me just introduce a little of our fellows. We have Clinton Moore from Melbourne, Australia. We have Karina Izquierdo from Mexico City. We have Lucia Urieta from Paris. We have Baha from Istanbul. We have Reswan from Dhaka, Bangladesh. We have Umesh from Mumbai, India. We also have Shandes Aziz from Tehran, Iran. We also have Gina from Jakarta. We have Ivy from Nairobi. And we also have Nadia from Jakarta. Joy from Manila, Philippines. Always forget the one who are very close to us. So these are the fellows who will be presenting what they have been doing over the years. At the same time, we also have Professor Michele Acuto from the UCL City Leadership Laboratory to give a little bit context on city diplomacy and city-to-city cooperation. We also have Amira from the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development, who will give some context on the implementation of the SDGs from a Malaysian perspective. So without further ado, let me first invite Professor Acuto to give a little bit of context of city-to-city cooperation. As background, one of the key elements of the Local Pathway Fellowship is about the city-to-city cooperation. As you will see in a minute, some of our fellows in different cities are working on exactly the same issue, like Joy from Manila and Reswan from Dhaka. So this is all about how they can connect with each other and about the synergy, how young people can cooperate on sustainable development in their cities. And Michele is an expert in city diplomacy, and he can talk a little bit about the context of where young people can contribute to this movement. So Michele, the floor is yours.
Thanks everyone for coming. I won't steal the stage because that's their stage and there's a lot of them. I think what Dan was asking was just a little bit of context and a little bit of a sort of giving you a sense of the scale of the importance of what the fellowship is doing and the job that you guys are doing. So just in a sense, this is all praises basically. I'm just praising you. Praises and praises and praises. But you might or not have come across things like city networks and partnerships of cities and multi-city programs. But if you go to any hall, not even any, almost every side event that you can find here, you will find things like the C40 Climate Leadership Group, Rockefeller 100, Resilient Cities, ICLEI, UCLG. There's lots of this sort of creatures. Now, the size and scale of international cooperation and international endeavors of cities is humongous. There's easily, it's even hard to account for, but it's easily accounted for 250, maybe 300 formal networks of cities at the moment that are doing things, anything. You see a lot on environment, but in fact the whole spectrum of the SDGs is pretty decently covered. Anything from resilience to humanitarianism to gender to culture and so forth. Now, it isn't just that these things are popular because there's events. These things are popular because they're doing a lot of things. Globally, city networks, more than half of city networks, produce joint policies between cities. That means that folks in São Paulo might be asked to work with folks in Paris and folks in Toronto at the same time to work on a new scheme for bus rapid transport. That means, for instance, we've just finished a piece of work with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We looked at 27 global cities. The majority of these places had a clear demand for capacity building, for external engagement. The majority, the nearly totality of these places engage with networks. They participate in these things to reach out to other cities. The size of cities involved in city diplomacy at the best landscape that we've done thus far, so accounting for 250 city networks globally, is about 11,000 cities. So this is not a story of people that work in London or Sydney. It is a story of people that work in places that you might have unlikely heard things from, like Peterborough in the United Kingdom or Turin in Italy and so forth. It isn't just the big cities. In fact, quite interestingly, recently McKinsey Global Institute said if you really have to put your money in urbanization and cities, put it on the middle-sized cities. The reason is that's where the majority of the growth and the challenges is sitting at the moment. Now, I think a critical part of having a fellowship looking on capacity building and connecting people is that need for sort of a slightly different generation. Typically, doing international things for cities was either about joining a campaign, signing up to a manifesto or a joint agreement, or doing twinnings, finding some sister cities, which is still really relevant. But the majority of city diplomacy, city networking activity involves multiple cities from multiple countries of very different realities. And quite interestingly, a piece of work that we've done in London, in fact in Melbourne, at the moment, we worked with about 250 experts on urban policy internationally. And we got all sorts of things interesting about how they engage internationally. But there was one key piece of data in there that is really telling. If you have to split all those people, the best way to split is by generation. If you look at the generational points of reference, 18 to 35 refers to a completely different landscape of cities than 35, which makes some of us a bit older, to 60. The 35 to 60 bracket tends to refer to London, to New York, etc., as I've just done, giving away my age. The 18 to 35 bracket refers to Singapore, refers to Dubai, refers to middle-sized cities, refers, really interesting, lots of mentions, for instance, to Chiang Mai rather than Bangkok. The spatial, the imaginary of what global cities are, what the global city reality and connection is in the sort of the younger bracket of urban practitioners is changing fast, is demanding much more international connections and capacity to relate to each other, so speaking languages, coming up with joint projects, relating to each other. That programs like, oh God, I didn't expect that was me. I assumed it was the fellowship. Anyway, programs like the fellowship become fundamental, and they become fundamental because they're not just about capacity building, but they're about doing it in a networked way, getting you guys next to each other, talking to each other, exchanging experience and so on. And the critical thing there is you might not all be in the same place or the same city or the same job in the near future. And the mobility element there is fundamental because you remain rooted to a place where you have a cohort of international colleagues, international champions in a sense. That really changes a lot. And we've seen quite a lot of people, for instance, doing exactly that, going from an advisory role or a civil society role in Sydney to a government role in Jakarta to a lending and coordination role at the World Bank. And it is really where these type of things make a massive difference. So in general, this is just me commending the initiative. The critical thing is that lots of these initiatives at the moment tend to forget the global local connection and the fact that you guys have feet on the ground, think about your everyday urban challenges that you see, but it is explicitly connected to the SDGs. It tries to put things on the ground and scale them internationally. That's exactly the type of project and programs that we desperately need, whether we look just at the UN Habitat and Habitat 3 in the urban agenda landscape, or it's a broader conversation about the UN reform and program for 2030. So big kudos for the program, more, and I actually just look forward to listening to stories and things and taking notes. But thanks everyone.
Thank you from Michele for your kind words. And as Michele said, the purpose of this program is about localizing the SDG, getting implementation on the ground. And now we have 8 of our fellows to talk about their journey with the local public fellowship and what they have been doing on the ground. First, we have Clinton from Melbourne.
Thanks, Dan, and it's good to meet a fellow person who lives in Melbourne. Michele, welcome. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clinton. I'm from Melbourne in Australia. I'm a social planner in local government. That's my job. I've also worked for ICLE, UN Habitat in the past. So I'm a wide-ranging urbanist. I hope I'm a talented one before I stand before you today to talk about the things that I've been doing across the fellowship. And my SDG target is 11.7, which is by 2030 to provide universal access to safe, inclusive and accessible green and public spaces, in particular for women, children, older persons and persons with disabilities. So Melbourne, as some of you may know, ranks very well on, in fact, #1 on some of them, a number of global livability and sustainability indices. But that does not mean that we do not need action on the SDGs and sustainable development. In fact, Melbourne can be one of the leading cities, indeed, in the world that can teach and be a resource for many cities around the world on sustainable urban development. So the story, I'll give you a brief overview on the story behind the numbers on public spaces in Melbourne. And if you think back to the dimensions of public spaces in that target, of course we have growth in Melbourne until 2050. We're going to grow by about 3.2 million people in the metropolitan area. Which is staggering when you think about it. Now, in the City of Melbourne municipal area, we have women reporting a 7% drop on feeling safe in public spaces in our cities in 1 year. And then in general, how safe do you feel? The general population, we've also had a drop. And due to the growth of our population in the City of Melbourne municipal area, the amount of open space and green space is also projected to fall. So that's the amount of open space that is available to residents per capita. So that's projected to fall also by 2026. So the solutions, what have I been doing since April last year? So advocacy. So I not only in Melbourne, but also overseas at the Asia Pacific City Summit in Korea. But the New Urban Agenda Conference, we did a pre-conference youth workshop. Also at the City of Melbourne, I was lucky enough to be on the SDGs working group to understand how the goals relate to the plans, policies and strategies of the city. And I also spoke to over 100 young women, 100 girl students at high schools on their thoughts and their opinions on public spaces. So with that nice big pot of ideas and thoughts in my head, what do I think is some good solutions for this target in Melbourne? So my idea is actually to develop a public space audit and education program for young people built on the 4 pillars of target 11.7, because young people actually, I think, they don't get a good urban education in high school. They don't get a good understanding, basic understanding of the principles of cities. And you know, we all walk through public spaces to come here today. We all thought, oh, where am I going to cross the road? Do I feel safe? Oh, and also it's very hot, as I experienced walking 20 minutes here. So public spaces are really the bedrock of the cities. They allow people to access their jobs, their services, and so forth, and of course mobility. And there will be an ethnographic video to accompany this project as well. Apart from my project, the legacy of Local Pathways for me is I've set up a website. If you go there, it's not quite, I'm not a web designer, okay, I'm an urbanist, so I'm realize2030.com. as Michele said, to understand the linkages between local people and global movements and tell their stories. And locally in Australia, in Melbourne as well, we've got some work to do, rolling up our sleeves in terms of a submission to the Australian government, who has an open inquiry on the SDGs. And also, I would like to work really much more closely with young people to understand the linkages between everyday behaviors and the SDGs. And of course, and the most important thing, I've found an amazing network of people, of supporters and friends from around the world. Thank you.
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here. It's so important that our voice will be heard from other people. I'm Bahar, I'm a Turkish woman, and first of all I will start by saying that being woman is not easy in this world. It's really not easy. And I'm super passionate about gender equality, and I'm a feminist. So we have been talking about that we need gender equality, but we don't know how. Like, what's the main root cause of this inequality? We're like, we need to do trainings, but how are we gonna change the perceptions of other people that we have been, like, we are so used to following the traditional gender roles. How are we gonna change that? I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago last year, and I have conducted a thesis research with young Turkish women. And I figured out that by doing in-depth interviews with Turkish women that it's so important to talk about reproductive rights and sexuality of women. So what I did after completing this thesis, I sent a message to a human rights lawyer, a Turkish woman, again, who wants to do a research and an initiative for Turkish women. And that's how I learned that social change really needs baby steps. We started an initiative together, and I will just show a short video of our initiative because it explains really clearly of what we are doing. Okay, so after starting this initiative, we used generosity to raise money because we needed money to provide sanitary pads, which was not really sustainable, but in order to start our first intervention, we needed that, and we raised $1,000 for our intervention. We did intervention in 2 different cities in Turkey, which are Adana and Ankara. Adana is in the southern part of Turkey, and Ankara is our capital city. And we went to 6 rural areas with the training about menstruation and reproductive rights of women. And it was amazing just to see a young girl seeing a pad for the very first time in her life and trying to understand what is that, and trying to force kind of those women to talk about menstruation because it was hard. But what I believe is that, yes, we have gender inequality, and we really need to take an action. The first thing we need to do is not to be shy about our sexuality and menstruation, because it's health. It's not being unhealthy, but it's health. So these are the pictures from our interventions, and we got donation from one of the biggest sanitary pad companies in Turkey. The problem we have now is that how can we make this initiative sustainable? We are trying to have underwears that can use as sanitary pads as well. So if we can do that, we can at least provide something that they can use sustainably. So if you're interested in this kind of research, please come and talk with me. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello everyone, I'm Lucia. I am from Mexico, but I live in Paris, France, and so I am representing the city as a local Pathways Fellow. And so I'm a development practitioner. I focus especially on education and social development projects and initiatives such as the World Innovation Summit for Education. And for the last 2.5 years, I worked with a local nonprofit called Les Petits Riens, which LPR, which focuses on providing access to culture to underprivileged youth. So Paris, I'd like to note also that we actually are 2 fellows in Paris. My colleague Pascaline is focusing on SDG 16, so on participatory processes, and I am focusing on SDG 4.7, which is focusing on education for sustainable development, global citizenship, the appreciation of cultural diversity, as well as the role of culture in sustainable development. So with Pascaline, we worked and tried to understand what are the really issues with Paris. And so she's working to develop more inclusive and participatory processes of decision-making to make sure that all voices are taken into account in Paris. And this is actually my starting point, because there are many voices in Paris to be heard. There are about 200 nationalities in Paris, and 15% of its population are foreigners. The city region gathers 40% of the immigrants in France, so this is very important. And the city has one of the highest rates in Europe of immigrant descendant populations. So really the diversity in this city is really rich. However, in spite of this long history of immigration and the diversity of the population, there are many prejudices and very high tensions regarding cultural identities. So this is exacerbated by the arrival also of newcomers. With the refugee and migrant crisis that Europe is facing, we really need to find ways for social inclusion to attain sustainable development. However, what I found throughout the fellowship is that sustainable development is understood and reduced to the environmental dimension. This is either by local government representatives, the citizens who don't really understand sustainable development or don't feel that SDGs are actually close to them, and then also by the official curriculum. Education for sustainable development is part of the official curriculum, but it only focuses on the environmental dimension. So we really need to change the narrative of sustainable development. But how do we do this? So the idea is to develop a pedagogy based on sustainable development education as well as global citizenship education, and to provide skills to the learners regarding, for instance, competencies such as empathy, critical thinking, the ability to communicate and collaborate with others, also understanding global issues and understanding cultural diversity. So throughout these frameworks that already exist and already have tools, we could transmit these competencies, this knowledge, these skills and prepare these learners to face the challenges, to build a more cohesive society, but also to face the challenges of the economic and environmental changes that we are living. So who are these learners? These learners are, on the one hand, local youth, and on the other hand, refugees and migrants. Because we know, actually, I've come to understand that there are many projects that focus on local youth, many projects that work with refugees and migrants, but they are rarely brought together as a community. But we are all living in the same city. So how do we bring them together? There is a lot of diversity. They all have different needs, but we need something, a common language, something intuitive that will bring them together. And for me, this is art. So this is a picture of a project of Brian McCormack. He works with refugees in camps. And I have worked with youth doing workshops. So throughout these workshops, a series of workshops, we would introduce them to these skills, these issues, and using dance, theater, music, plastic arts, we would have a better way to engage them in sustainable development, starting from the local scale, make them understand how they are involved in sustainable development with the SDGs as well, and then scale up from there to understand the impact they can have. So in conclusion, we need people in the cities that are not just city dwellers. We need true citizens that are prepared to face the challenges, and we believe that through this pedagogy we can actually have them and have citizens that will make all the gears of sustainable development turn and be prepared for the future. So, thank you.
So hello everyone, my name is Shatnaz Azizi and I'm based in Iran, Tehran, but as a Kurdish woman I chose Bijar city in Kurdistan province because I had a more empathy with its people. Well, this city is a small city with a long history in a ancient Silk Road and with thanks to its handmade carpets and rugs with global reputation. But actually, unfortunately, most of these global reputation is going vanish, and because of the bad urban planning and master plan. So as a land use planner, I chose SDG 11 and Target 11.3 with focus on participatory and integrated urban planning and management. Actually, my challenge was urban blight. So my first step, the practical step in this matter was to know what's the reality of the society and what's the reality of the map of the society. So we had lots of interview to know what's the reality of the life of people based on the urban maps and master plans. The results show that the old Bazaar district was the only in-cities district that has retained its preferred character. So people, they started to create a new identity for their desolated city based on cultural and environmental heritages out of the city boundaries. So this matter but helps to the people that because this new identity helped them to organize themselves in 9 non-governmental organizations for protecting these heritages out of the city. But it means for them as a right to the city because of the bad and desolated city master planning and also the collapse and the very instructional urban management. So they decided to start from the peripheral assets. So that's why my project focused on this urban blight and to ask myself to how can I change my mindset and leave the business as usual to work on the beside the urban planning and master planning. I work in the social capital actually formation and help them to face with the collapsed urban planning and urban management through their actions in their activistic works. So the solution was that we have worked on the smartphones and also the web-based citizen-generated data with three important outcomes. The first one is public participatory urban planning platform and public watch mechanism through urban simulation models. And the second one is active urban public spaces and frontages through social volunteering, geolocalized localized apps, and also bringing Bija resident sentiments on the map through mixed reality media technologies and virtual tourism system, which is very important for the local, actually the Bija cultural economy. So as a conclusion, I want to mention you and remind you that for any solutions under the name of sustainability, we really require to fully engage with the people and community. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Joy Baldo. I work for ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, and as a professor mentioned earlier, we are a network of local governments. So as a fellow, I am working on empowering the youth to champion climate action and disaster resilience, which will contribute to SDG 13.3, which aims to raise awareness on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and early warning. So, who here has been in the Philippines? Okay, quite a number of hands. So as you might know, just a brief background info, the Philippines is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and this is further exacerbated by the fact that we lack capacity and resources. So the Philippines is situated in the Pacific Ring of Fire and the Typhoon Belt, which means that we are prone to frequent earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the Philippines is actually hit by an average of 20 typhoons a year, and a quarter of which is highly destructive. Now, we also have a very young population. We have more than half aged 15 to 30 years old. So the Filipino youth can play a tremendous role to lead a movement to help solve problems in their communities. So why not harness their potential and their ingenuity by providing them with the right knowledge, the resources and tools for them to actually come together and work. So with this premise, we work with Yes Pinoy Foundation in partnership with the city government of Marikina in implementing a project called Young, Empowered, and Service-Oriented Filipino Citizens. So Marikina is also highly vulnerable. 80% of the city is flood-prone and 70% is prone to liquefaction. So through this project, we trained a pioneer group of 44 volunteer students called Yes Pinoy Movers from both public and private schools. This group serves as a breeding ground to train them and for young leaders to flourish and lead initiatives in their own communities. So they also serve as advocacy partners of their schools and other relevant institutions in implementing other environmental and social civic activities. So we conducted a series of training workshops and other collaborative activities such as field trips and brainstorming so that they will understand the vulnerabilities in their communities and they will try to identify ways on how they can contribute in solving this day-to-day problems. So the project is still in its infancy stage, but the idea is for these youth leaders to create other leaders by connecting to other youth organizations throughout the country, and they will exchange their ideas and they will exchange best practices so that they can come together and create change in their communities. So A rather similar initiative and concept will also be presented by my co-fellow from Bangladesh later on. So to ensure the sustainability of this project, it is linked with an order from the Department of Education in establishing youth organizations called Youth for Environment in Schools. Now, awareness raising can only go so far. However, we still need political and financial instruments that will, for us to be able to create a bigger platform and build momentum. We need our political leaders to invest in us, invest in our youth, to create policies that will encourage youth participation, especially in political decision making. So while we clamor for this to happen, we will continue to work hard to inspire change. And especially now, we are the most connected generation ever. Do you agree? With all these social media apps. So why don't we use this interconnectivity to build meaningful partnerships? After all, this is what the local pathways is all about, like bringing together different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, to just learn from each other and try to bring back the learnings to their own country. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you all for everyone here. So I'm Rezwan Siddiqui from Dhaka. I work at the universities. So I am living in Dhaka for my whole life, and like it was my birthplace. So to me, it is the best place on earth. But unfortunately, like we have been ranked the least livable cities, like one of the least livable cities in the last couple of years. So very unfortunate for that. Melbourne is like they're like one of the best. So, but so it's already said, like hard to plan and harder to implement, like if it's really hard. And there are like a couple of reasons that already mentioned by several researchers, like it's overpopulation and poor development practices, like copying the development practices from other cities and regions. And then of course the climate change issues and lack of awareness and the capacity of the population. So in this context, I'm focusing on the SDG 13.3, which is actually improve education, raising awareness, and human and institutional capacity building on climate change issues. So Dhaka is like extreme climate change vulnerability. It has like because of the geographical location and also the fact of the increasing climate change migrants from the coastal areas. And there's already said like lack of awareness and capacity to tackle the climate change, and also the another issue, the unattractiveness of climate change educations. I teach at universities, and most of the private universities in Bangladesh don't have any programs focusing on environment and climate change. Some of them, most of the private public universities have, but it's not deemed as a profitable program to run. So it's really hard to know that the youth don't have the awareness needed to tackle the issues. And in this context, we started a project which is called SDG Lab. We do trainings and workshops for the youths, particularly at the universities. So it's a day-long trainings and workshops. We focus on in SDG, particularly on climate change and environment issues. So the thing is, we approached several universities, and we did training at 4 universities in Dhaka and 6 coastal cities also. So the outcome is really attractive. Like right now we have been approached by several other universities to do the similar training for them. The reason may be because we don't take any profit or money or anything like that. It's all voluntary. So we go with other experts from NGOs or maybe other university lecturers or professors. So they go there, they facilitate the whole training for the students. And these students mostly they're from the like non-environmental background, like they're studying law, English, or mathematics, or physics, chemistry, other things. So it seems attractive for them, and they're really interested. So the outcome we are focusing on right now, as these youths will be in the workforce from 5 to 6 years now, they will do jobs, they will be in the government, they will do business. At least we are hoping that they will be aware of the SDGs issues, and they will practice the sustainable practices in their business, in their jobs, whenever and wherever they are. And we think that that's one of the main way to achieve SDGs. Thank you all.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Karina Izquierdo. I am a Mexican architect, and I have focused on the urban scale not only from design but also with territorial strategies and active leadership in influencing urban policies. Urbanization in Latin America has not generated yet the economic and social equity conditions to promote prosperous environments, and it has created a lot of increase in the rate of urban risks, and this is the case of Mexico City. This is why I chose to focus on Target 11B to implement policies for inclusion, resource efficiency, and the reduction of disaster risk reduction. Now, to understand the complexities in Mexico City, we must understand it at its metropolitan scale. It holds a population of around 19 million people, out of which almost 33% live in informal settlements, 28.9% in poverty. Most of them in front of environmental risks because, unfortunately, these parts of the city are the ones that are most risk prone. So when we take a look at the vulnerabilities that this entails, we can understand from the Atlas of Risk that the geological characteristics that subsidence, for example, presents in some parts of the city, where 14 centimeters per year in certain parts and 19 centimeters in others, and we can locate the Earth's fractures. But what does this really mean? What does it mean for the people that live in these areas, like the red parts here, in the social part of vulnerability? What does it mean in terms of the land that they inhabit, the fact that we have such an unbalance in water, that the water we extract from the aquifers is much more that one's being infiltrated, so this leads to derived risk. 5.5 million people are vulnerable to earthquakes. So through the Local Pathways Fellowship, I have been able to engage actively with decision makers and develop a policy vision through programs such as the Future Leaders Connect from the British Council, as well as engaging with local agencies in Mexico, UN Habitat. And last year, in September, we faced the worst disaster since '85. An earthquake came to remind us just how vulnerable we are. It left us in need of a new program for development and the need for urgent action and to build back better. So this policy vision that I have been working on and is right now at the stage of a policy incubator entails 3 strategic points. So the first one is the appropriation of risk. We need to create our own processes of our understanding and of our territory. If we are to reduce the vulnerabilities, we need to be able to quantify them qualitatively and quantitatively. The second is citizen participation. I have also been part of workshops facilitating with universities and civil societies to empower citizens to become active urban actors. And finally, promoting a new paradigm for water, a management of water in a circular way as a pillar for resilience and to be able to build back better.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. I am Umesh Balwani from Mumbai, India, and I work with the government of Maharashtra in Mumbai. So, as a local pathways fellow, my focus has been on SDG 8. And why SDG 8? It's because there are a lot of people who are entering the job market and there aren't enough jobs to give them employment. So, and in fact, India being a nation of more than 1 billion and Mumbai being a city of almost more than 20 million, this particular issue becomes particularly more relevant. So, and so what I through my research found out was that startups are the best way to kind of address this issue. And I would just like to give you a context of why startups are the best way. So basically, if you just compare the statistics of companies who were the top ranked by market cap in 1987 and 2017, there was just one company which was a technology entrepreneurship, technology-based giant in the top 10. Whereas if you see in 2017, there are 5. So, and these 5 companies which are in red in 2017, they were startups like no longer than 2 decades ago, and in case of Facebook, just a decade ago. So this is an like clear-cut picture of how startups are helping create economic wealth, and at the same time creating jobs for the people. And not just this, but they are essentially changing the way we work and live. So after determining this particular thing, I kind of did some research on what is it the existing scenario in my particular region. So this is the map of India, and we just tried to see what is that can be done in my state. So Maharashtra is one on the left, which is in white. The white ones are the states which didn't have a startup policy in place, which is one of the key elements to drive the this particular mandate ahead. And I, being a part of government of Maharashtra, I tried to find out why that this particular initiative is not happening, and like it was that just that it was recognized that it's important, but there wasn't due attention or urgency given to it. So I brought on board a couple of colleagues of mine at the government of Maharashtra as well, to kind of reach out to more than 100 stakeholders and kind of establish the very urgent need of this particular policy, and went ahead and pitched to the Honorable Chief Minister of Maharashtra for a need of this policy. And while pitching it to the Honorable Minister, I made sure that I cover the essence of startups, how they would be essentially not just creating jobs, but as such helping us achieve sustainable development goals, like other than the SDG 8 as well, by bringing in efficiencies in whichever sector you go in. So the minister was convinced, and he gave us a mandate to roll out the policy, and I would be happy to share that the policy got approved by the Cabinet of Ministers recently in January. And the policy essentially is having a multi-pronged approach, with kind of focusing on developing the infrastructure relevant to startups, relaxing regulatory requirements and making the doing business easier, and kind of funding startups at an initial stage, which is the most key component, and at the same time developing the new generation with an entrepreneurial mindset and bringing in initiatives on that front. So essentially the policy would be, the policy period is for the next 5 years, and with creation of around 15 incubators and a host of other initiatives, we are expecting that this policy would go on to create 10,000 startups in Maharashtra, of which Mumbai is the capital city, and provide direct and indirect jobs to around 5 lakh people. So this is what has been my work as a local pathways fellow, and how I have been able to leverage my presence in the government to create sort of a difference in my region. And I am glad to say that Local Pathways Fellowship gave me a sort of a platform to bring in learnings from other areas as well, and kind of bring in perspective, a global picture, but how do you bring in that global picture in the local context and sort of deliver action there. So that's what my work has been.
So my name is Mira. I'm from the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development. So I'll briefly discuss about how we at the center are achieving the SDGs. So as some of you may be familiar with this is the SDG Index and Dashboard. Basically, it's the first worldwide assessment of countries around the world and where they stand in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is Malaysia. I won't go into too much detail as to what qualifies each goal to be under the green, red, orange, or yellow category. In summary, you can tell that with green, it means we're going the right direction. However, I like to point out the red areas. You can see zero hunger, good health, well-being, reduced inequalities, and life on land are areas that we need to work on. So this is sort of where we come in. So we're at Jeffrey Sachs Center. We launched in December in 2016. So just over a year old now. This is essentially a partnership between the Jeffrey Chow Foundation and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We are essentially a regional center of excellence, and our main purpose is to advance the Sustainable Development Goals achievement in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. So we do this through three main pillars: research, education, and partnerships. With research, I guess you can call falls under two different categories. One is advancing the knowledge of SDGs and also providing SDG solutions-based research. Through education, as you can see there, we do conduct workshops and talks for the public. We are working on a master's program. We have executive training programs and online blended workshops, just to name a few, in terms of education and awareness. Of course, none of this would be possible with the partnerships. So as you can see there, we are a member of the SDSN. We also work close with SDSN Youth and SDG Academy. And we have our local partners and collaborators that aren't mentioned here, but of course, none of that would be possible without our partnerships. So now in the next few minutes, I'll just go through some of our key projects and initiatives and how they relate to the goals. So one of our main ones is an ASEAN SDG dashboard. So this looks at all 17 goals, and essentially we are developing an online platform comparing the SDG achievement of various countries and providing policy for policymakers. And we're also providing practical policy recommendations for high priority areas such as those in red. Sunway Smart Sustainable City. So I'm not sure if some of you are familiar. We are housed at Sunway University in a Sunway City. The Sunway Group has started a Smart Sustainable City initiative, and we at JC are advisors for the city. Sustainable Campus Initiative. So this is fairly recent as well. The Sunway University has started a Sustainable Campus Committee, and at JSC we're looking specifically at energy consumption on campus, as well as food waste and energy consumption at the university, as well as how we can provide long-term solutions for the campus. So we also happy to announce that we have a youth organization, Sunway Youth for Sustainable Development at the university, focusing on educating and bringing awareness to the youth community at our university. So this year they're looking at organizing an ASEAN Youth Conference, and last year they hosted an Earth Week, creating workshops, working with Zero Waste Malaysia on composting, and also working with Dialogue in the Dark. This is a fairly new project, generating dynamic innovation-based economic growth that is socially inclusive. This looks at specifically goal number 8, decent work and economic growth, where we leverage on technological innovation to help bring social inclusivity, helping those in low marginalized groups get out of poverty and into powering remote off-grid communities. This project is also fairly recent. We are looking at connecting off-grid communities with technology and grid. So we've actually been in touch with a community in Perak, which is a state here in Malaysia, and basically understanding what their needs are and what their use for electricity and energy is. Big data and climate change. This looks at goal number 13. And here we are looking at urban emissions from land use and other on-road and off-road activities. We also have projects relating to urban rivers. So there's a river, Panaga River, which actually flows through Sunway City. And with this project, we look at showcasing approaches on how to rehabilitate and rejuvenate urban rivers. This next one is speculative design for co-designing policies relating to aging in place and city. Looks at SDGs 3, 10, 11, and 17. So essentially this project aims to engage citizens as co-designers in policy making. So essentially asking the aging community, how would you like your city or your place to be like, and it's conducive for you. This next project is on mangroves, goal number 13 and 15. This project, we actually use a model-based simulation to improve the state of knowledge of mangrove vulnerability and the responses to predicted climate change and propose possible adaptation strategies. So the last two focus on education. Executive training program, master's program, as I mentioned. We had our inaugural executive training program last year in October. This was led by Professor Jeffrey Sachs himself and a world international team, experts in sustainable development practice. That one brought together participants from international agencies, private sector, as well as government leaders from Malaysia, China, India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So essentially created a space conducive for partner and collaboration and bringing together private and public sector. Our online blended workshop is in partnership with SDG Academy, which is a massive online open course. And so essentially it's an 8-week course. We bring together combining online courses and face-to-face engagement to provide practical solutions of problems we face at Sunway City. Okay, that's all for me. If you'd like to reach us, you can reach us here. Some of my colleagues are actually here today if you'd like to know more about our projects. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're being kicked out. Everyone, I just wanted to thank you for being here. My name is Anastasia. I'm a project manager for the local pathways.